What happens when Joe finds out? Since it was Friday, and I had just taken my Volvo in for service, I decided that the serviceman would drive me home instead of to the office. On the way, he would drive me back. It was a warm, late spring day, and there was yard work waiting for me at home, which was the reason for my decision. We have a big backyard, and I was on the back property line raking leaves when I saw my brother's red Corvette pull into our driveway. Great, I thought. The only time he comes here is to borrow something, and then he rarely comes back. As I approached the driveway, I heard my son Sam call out to me, "Hey, Dad, what brings you to the land of wimps?" Dad? Why did my son call my brother Dad? And why is this the land of wimps? My brother replied, I'm returning Uncle Joe's circular saw. I accidentally cut the electrical cord. He asked to fix it so I can finish my project at home. Is there a misunderstanding Joe here? Misunderstanding Joe? My name is Joe, and I hardly consider myself an ignoramus. Maybe I am. Maybe I should stay outside the garage and listen to this insulting conversation. Sure enough, I turned on my cell phone to record the conversation. Sam was saying, Clueless car isn't here. He rarely gets home before 5, and I try not to spend much time with him. So no, I don't think he's home. Say, when school is over, when can I spend time at your house? It's a lot more fun there than it is here. I'd love to have you visit, but your mom wants to spend as much time with you as possible. You're her only child, and she'll be lonely when you're gone. Give her some slack. She's due at my place Thursday afternoon, and I can ask her about having you stay with me for a week or two this summer. I hated to hear my son ask, why doesn't Mom divorce Clueless and move in with you? I didn't realize she regularly spent days at his house. Oh no. Things were starting to add up that I didn't like at all. Maybe I was clueless? Thinking about what was going on was weighing on me. Eric bragged, ever since she got pregnant with you, I've been asking her about it monthly. She says, no, you're great, but you'd be a lousy husband. I have a husband that I love and cherish very much. Every moment I spend with him makes me feel like I am the luckiest woman in the world. I love him, and I certainly don't love you. That's why, son, she won't divorce Joe Tyndall, but she will have fun with Eric Tyndall from time to time. I have to go now, but I'll see you tomorrow at noon at your grandparents' house for the annual family birthday party and Memorial Day dinner. At that moment, my legs turned to spaghetti, and I slid down the garage wall into my hosta garden. My world was shattered. The fact that my son was not my biological son was shattered beyond recognition. The fact that my wife got pregnant by my brother and then had regular fun with him was overwhelming. Somehow I got back to my workplace and sat on the rope swing, a swing on which I spent many hours pushing my son to his delight. I sat on that swing and cried until a huge puddle of mud formed at my feet. What was I supposed to do? Before I did anything, I had to assess the situation. And that's when I remembered my redemption, the DNA test. A few years ago, Carol, Sam, and I had taken the 23andMe DNA test. How could that be wrong? But what if Carol threw away my test and put Eric's saliva in a test tube with my name on it? That would hide Sam's true origins. What a despicable thing to do. They threw away my heritage and replaced it with this jerk's, intentionally denying me the right to know that I wasn't the father of the boy I so desperately loved. Once I was done with thoughts of redemption, I had to take stock of my current world. My name is Joe Tyndall, and I'm 43 years old. I don't weigh much more now than I did in college, 175 pounds. I am slender and was not a jock in high school or college. My specialty was running, and I excelled on our high school track team. Now the distance running I enjoyed is interrupted by family and work obligations, but I still put on a few miles each week, sometimes participating in charity 5K or 10K runs. Work for me is a dual role as finance and operations director at Tyndall's Machine Company in my hometown. My great-grandfather started out as a blacksmith, sharpening plowshares and attaching iron rings to wooden wagon wheels. Grandfather Tyndall and my father Edward followed suit, each adding the then newest metalworking equipment to the business. We now manufacture precision aerospace parts and metal components. My father Edward is the president, and my brother Eric is the director of marketing for a 50-person company. My father did not go to college, but attended the best trade school available at the time. I have bachelor's degrees in industrial engineering and accounting, so I am the CFO and COO. My younger brother Eric was the complete opposite of me physically. At 165 centimeters tall, he was 5 inches taller than me and 50 pounds heavier. He was the consummate athlete, big, loud, arrogant, and a real bully. In high school soccer, he was a crowd favorite. A small college scholarship paid for his tuition while I had to work and take out loans. He only graduated from college because the teachers were constantly putting in credits so he could play soccer. Eric's degree in physical education was of no use to him or other employers, so he started working at Tyndall's as a junior mechanic. Most of our jobs require precision, and that wasn't his thing. Instead, he used his name to open doors for new and existing customers. He couldn't discuss the intricacies of our business, but he had a great ability to intimidate to keep customers happy. Don't get me wrong, he was good at what he did and brought value to the company. As with any multi-generational company, we had our disagreements. For example, Eric wanted a commission on new sales. It wasn't outside the industry, but he was already making a good salary, and so was I. I used this moment to ask him to keep all the income from the patents I had registered. Edward easily conceded to Eric, but I had to seriously fight him to get the money I earned. My wife Carol met me because of my beauty. I graduated from college and worked alongside my father. During and after college, I dated many women, but this one was special. Carol had a high school diploma and was working as an English teacher. A year after we met while jogging, we were married in Carol's home church. After 2 happy years of married life, we decided to start our own family. Despite dating constantly on evenings and weekends, there was no way Carol could get pregnant. Our whole lives were focused on getting her pregnant. Neither of us wanted to take a fertility test at this time, maybe in a year or so, but not now. I was heartbroken because I wanted to have at least 2 children, regardless of their gender. We both relaxed. Just a couple months later, Carol started her period, but she didn't want to jinx it by telling anyone, including me. The pregnancy was not without its difficulties. For the last 2 months, Carol was bedridden by doctor's orders. The labor was difficult, and we almost lost both my wife and our newborn son that day. Sam, which is what we named our baby boy, was an energetic boy, constantly active. To Carol's dismay, he and I loved scuffles on the floor. The hours spent throwing, kicking, and tossing a ball were countless. His grades were not exceptional, but were slightly higher than the average boy his age. After his 15th birthday, the relationship between us began to deteriorate. I attributed it to the usual conflict between parents and children at that age. We used to chat for hours over a ball, but now he said he was busy. Too busy with his cell phone and Game Boy to talk to his dad. When it came to fighting, he would get moody and disrespectful. From what I understood, he thought being an accountant was a less manly profession than others. Perhaps part of the reason for this was that he was taller and more muscular than I was. Over the years, Carol remained the perfect wife in every way. Her knowledge, intelligence, and total dedication to her vocation made her the principal of McKinley School, a school that was designed to give special attention to students who struggled academically and had difficulty interacting with others, that is, fighting. I noticed that this stress of supervising unruly students was leading to conflict at home. She would make barbed remarks about what I was or was not doing according to her definition of a task. Her irritation with me rarely extended to bedtime. She was always sweet and loving when we lay under the covers. There was no part of our lives that I found unacceptable or not frequent enough. So I was dumbfounded when I heard my brother tell Sam that he was Sam's father and had been having regular fun with Carol for over 17 years. No way, I thought to myself. But what did I really know for sure? The thing I doubted the most was that Sam had the same physique as Eric and Edward. I'm the odd man out when it comes to genetic similarities. Something was wrong, either in my head or in my stomach, as I pondered the possibilities. That evening, I watched Carol like a hawk watches a mouse. There were absolutely no obvious signs that she was having an affair. Dinner was lively and pleasant. Sam left to pick up some friends in his car to watch a movie or something, and they sat around until 11 p.m. Since Sam was gone until 11 p.m., Carol and I got busy cleaning up the kitchen. She asked me to load the dishwasher while she went to the bathroom. When I turned around, she was wearing only a lace apron. She pretended nothing strange had happened and told me, "Hurry up! Get to work because I have plans for you today." We laughed and played. Then we went to bed where we got down to business. The next morning, Saturday, we were to go to my parents' house for Edward's 70th birthday dinner. Carol didn't like driving in my Volvo, and Sam wanted to go alone so he could leave early. We did as Carol wanted. We all drove her Lexus. When we walked in the front door, my mom, Sally, started hugging us in order. Carol, Sam, then me. The same order was for Edward. Next, I watched Eric and Carol interacting. Eric happily hugged Sam and then held out his arms for a hug from Carol. The hug was enthusiastic on Eric's part and lifeless on Carol's. In fact, I thought I saw a look of boredom and irritation on her face. Not the reaction I expected from lovers who had been having fun for 17 years. During a lull in the conversation, I spoke the first sentence. Eric, I need to talk to our financial controller Thursday afternoon. Will you be in the office to fill in for me? I said this knowing that he knew nothing about accounting processes and wouldn't help anyone who called me. No, Joe, I won't be in the office either. Big project in the works. Carol blew her nose, letting a couple bubbles into her iced tea. That means I'm close to finding out something. Well, big guy, is it something that makes you sweaty and exhausted? No, I've worked with this man many times and always come out a winner. Carol's gaze was hotter than any of our plasma cutters. I watched the color leave her face. No one made a sound, not a fork hitting the plate, not the clinking of ice in the tea. Midnight in the cemetery was a deafening experience compared to Mom's dining room. The eyes of all five of them were spinning. That, too, was a sign that they were all aware of the infidelity. I thought I could hear the sweat trickling down their skin. It was exactly what I wanted. To be an ignorant Joe to these five, but underneath that clumsiness, I knew what was going on. Dad melted the ice by saying, well, guys, get out your calendars to see who's going where. He continued, I'm glad you're all gathered here today for my birthday. My grandfather bought this 160-acre tract when it was a few miles out of town. He would be proud that the land is still in the family, and our family business is growing under Eric and Joe's leadership. As a result of my trust in you boys and my advanced age, I am going to step down as president of Tyndall's. Eric will be the new president. There will be a change in the salary structure. Joe's new salary will be 75% of Eric's. I really want Joe to stay with the company and be rewarded for his good work. With Joe's income from the patents, you both will have about the same income. Carol squeezed my hand and smiled warmly. So I'll report directly to Eric? Eric, who doesn't know the difference between a CNC machine and a popcorn popper, will be running the company. That's a recipe for disaster of the worst kind. Listen, bro, I've always been in charge, and you're the head small bean salesman. The boss is supposed to be the alpha male, not a wimp like you. Get over it, Joe. I repeat, I win, you lose. That's enough, boys. Eric, you're not going to be the boss. I'm still chairman of the board, and I outrank you. I own all the stock. You will run the business the way I tell you to. This company has been in our family for over 100 years, and I will not let it fall apart through my fault. We're Tyndalls, and an important family legacy is as much in our hands as the people on the wall. So calm down. Dad pointed to the pictures of 3 generations of Tyndalls on the living room wall for empty effect. By the way, Dad, which picture on the wall is your grandfather in? My grandfather is on the left side of the picture. My father is next to him, and I'm on the far end. I thought you knew that. I just confirmed it because I have a question. If you look at the 3 pictures, I don't look like any Tyndall, living or dead. Not in build, not in hair color, not in facial expression. Eric and Sam look like Tyndall, but not me. I don't understand that. My mother's shoulders clenched. Her face turned gray at the same rate Dad's turned red. Silence fell again, gazes darting between my parents and Eric. I realized that the best way to get people to open up was to dump shit in their laps, then shut up and let them clean it up carefully without getting their hands dirty. Joe, you can finally learn a family secret. Your mom and I were planning to get married, and your mom got drunk at a bachelorette party and got pregnant. She thought she was pregnant with me. She couldn't have known. We were married before she even knew she was pregnant. We were both surprised but happy because I thought I was the father. You were a weak child with developmental delays. We thought it was because of your mother's pregnancy problems. You were a sickly baby, and we almost lost you when you got mumps. Within weeks, we were on the verge of death. Joe, you were about 10 years old before we realized you weren't my biological son. Sally hid the fact that she had another man before our marriage. She said you looked a lot like that guy. When DNA tests became available, we had them done and confirmed that you are not my biological son, but Eric. Well, that answered some questions about how I was treated compared to Eric. But it wasn't the bombshell I was expecting. I was trying to figure out Sam's biological father. And here I am getting this shoved in my face. Everything turned upside down. There wasn't much I could do about it, but now I had even more questions. Finally, Mom spoke up. That doesn't mean we don't love you as much as Eric. We raised you as our son, and we both still consider you our son. That was nice to hear from her, but what did it have to do with what I was hearing from Sam and Eric? Okay, Dad, that explains my body type. Why doesn't Sam have my body type and not the same as you and Eric? Here comes more shit for them. Joe, you and Carol tried so hard to have a baby that it became stressful for Carol. She thought she couldn't handle you, so she came to ask your mother for advice. She remembered that you had a severe case of mumps and had probably become infertile. Your mother and I came to the conclusion that for the sake of your marriage and Tyndall's inheritance, we needed Eric to impregnate Carol. Carol objected at first, but then she realized that everyone in the family would benefit from the Tyndalls having a new child. That included you, Joe. You wanted a family, and Eric and Carol gave you what you couldn't produce. We hoped they wouldn't find out. But thanks to DNA tests and the genetic differences between Tyndall and non-Tyndall physiques, it would inevitably come to light. My mind was overwhelmed by a blizzard of emotions. Emotions swirled around in my head like a tornado. There are no words. I could not comprehend this momentous discovery. My mother and wife surrounded me, embracing me with love and tenderness. Both had tears in their eyes. They understood the pain and confusion I was experiencing. The mother whispered, my son, I am so proud of you." Carol whispered, my husband, I love you so much." Father said, "We hoped, Joe, that you wouldn't take offense at this, but would enjoy the love your family has for you." "Gee, Edward, can I call you Edward since I know you are not my father? What makes you think I wouldn't mind being humiliated by my entire family?" Sam snorted. "Now you know how humiliated I was. When the kids think you're my father and not a real man like Eric." "Jez." Everyone turned their eyes to the insolent Sam. Carol, slapping him across the face, exclaimed, "Joe was the best father in the world to you. He spared nothing to make you happy. I've seen 1,000 children who had a worse father than him, but none were better than him. You should count your lucky stars that he raised you." I said sarcastically, "Why did it take you so long to inform me of such a generous concern for my feelings? Why not pull the scab off the wound right away instead of lying to me all these years? I bet you laughed merrily behind my back when I bragged about what a wonderful son I had. Instead, you nicknamed me Misunderstood Joe." Once again, the center of the universe is silent. "We couldn't tell you that, Joe. It would have been too painful for you, and we hoped no one would find out. Besides, we needed you at the plant. You're the brains and ingenuity of the whole operation. We'd be lost if you got upset and left. Besides, we couldn't afford to pay someone as good as you. We asked the recruiter to give us a salary range for the CFO and COO, and he said they were more than double what we pay you. That's too much for me. You pushed my brother to conceive my wife for Tyndall's child, not mine. You made me work for less pay just so your profits and dividends would be higher. You make me think I'll run the show one day, but Tyndall's blood is more important than competence. I can't believe what you've dumped on me today. Next thing you know, you'll be telling me that my precious wife is still having fun with that asshole brother of mine. Here it is, the great revelation. Whether or not she'll tell me she's still having fun with Eric. Maybe she'd just lie, like she'd been doing for the last 17 years. The room fell silent again. Glances flickered between the co-conspirators, but no one denied the mortal sin. Finally, a meek voice moaned, "I'm sorry, Joe. I'm sorry, but you have to understand the strain and stress I'm under at work. I don't love him. I hate him for what he is and who he is. However, I need him to keep me from going crazy." With those words, she collapsed to the floor. My left foot took a step toward her to comfort her, but the rest of my body was saying, "Stop." She had brought this on herself. Now she would have to deal with the consequences. "I'm sorry, son, but we—" Son, you're a damn hypocrite. Calling me son after you ruined my entire existence. Giving me minimal affection compared to Eric while we were children. Inciting my wife to cuckoldry by passing off Eric's illegitimate child as your own. and all the while laughing at my complete ignorance regarding your complete and utter disrespect for me. I'm done with this snake's den. By saying you are doing this for me, you are intentionally and literally mocking me for your own personal reasons. None of those reasons were for my benefit. They were all heartbreaking to me. I am like a newborn orphan, an abandoned child with absolutely no one to come to my aid. A personal and sincere screw you to each and every one of you vile bastards. Shouting this rant so loud that my mouth was watering, I turned to leave. Just as I reached the door, a large paw grabbed my arm. I'm really sorry about this, Joe. Since it means so much to you, I'm not going to entertain your wife. So I'm returning it to you. What chutzpah on the part of this consummate asshole, giving me back my tormented wife. I turned toward the door again, but this time Eric spun me in place. Spinning proved unexpectedly useful to me, as I had the opportunity to strike him stealthily as I turned around. Carol and Sam rushed toward him but with different emotions. Sam was trying to calm his mom's breeder. Sam turned to me and screamed, "You bastard, you bloody bastard!" Ha! What hypocrisy! One bastard calling another bastard a bastard. What a bloody sewer you've made of this place, Ed and Sally. A bloody mess. Carol started kicking Eric in the back as hard as she could, screaming, "You asshole! You deserve this and 1,000 others!" I left the mini riot, got into Carol's car, and started backing up, crashing into the driver's side of Eric's precious Corvette. As I drove out of the yard, I crashed into the passenger side of Edward's new F-150 pickup truck. From the pain and humiliation, it was all I could do to keep the car on the road. An abandoned gas station gave me a respite from the experience. At first, I cried until I thought I was drying myself up, and then anger erupted like 4th of July fireworks. Punching the vinyl dashboard was the most I was capable of in that state. Finally, fatigue took over, my limbs weakened, and my mind went numb. The buzzing of a cell phone came from the floor. It was one of the many calls and texts the whore, my ex-wife Carol, was trying to send. Taking a deep breath, I thought, what am I going to do now? There was no way they could undo what they had done. I was not only a cuckold, but a true bastard, as my mother was not married to my biological father. Well, isn't that the real shitstorm I found myself in? 3 days ago, I was king of the world. Now it's a world of shit. The only good thing I could think of was that I had a choice. I could continue to be ignorant Joe and I'd get a raise, but I'd have to report to Eric or Edward as my boss. Every day I would see Eric and Carol, causing the same pain in my gut that I saw today. It couldn't be because they'd both ruined my life. The first option was no good. The second option was to just sneak out of town. Let the Tyndall family go their separate ways. Let one chair at the table remain empty. That was the idea, but they didn't care. They didn't care about me when I was here, so why should they care when I wasn't? The second option wasn't for me, but maybe I could combine the second option with the third. The third option involved my involvement with the Snake family, but not in their favor. Make them regret every deception, lie, theft, and humiliation they caused me. Yeah, I like door number 3. The only thing holding me back now was that I was 20 miles from my home and I needed to move on. The prostitute's damaged car was left in the yard, not in the driveway. My computer and all important papers were boxed up and loaded into my Volvo. Clothes that I would need for the next few months were stowed in the car. All other clothes and things I would like to keep but don't need right now were put in Sam's 2017 Acura. Sam's dog Bullet wouldn't leave me alone when I tried to escape. He would make noises like he wanted to go outside. He was always a pain in my butt, and I would have been glad to be rid of having to clean up poop, feed, and walk a dog that never liked me. Bullet did me a very nice parting favor by pooping next to the house. Grinning, I picked up the steaming excrement and carried it into the bedroom. On our marital bed was a quilt my mother and grandmother had made for us. It was called Engagement Ring, because most of the squares had wedding ring prints on them. Other squares were made from clothes that Carol and I wore as children. Our names and wedding date were sewn into the squares. It was a keepsake box made of fabric, the perfect place for a steaming dog turd to take a place of honor in this house. The final ingredient was my wedding ring lying on top of the dog poop. No doubt Carol would recognize the symbolism. All the wall pictures of the whore and Eric's son were stacked on her cherrywood dining table. Covering the pictures with a towel to protect myself, I picked up the hammer. I drove my largest nail from the store into the entire stack, causing glass to fly in all directions. Now I was ready to move on with my life. Nothing and no one made me feel like I should be here. My Volvo drove me to an extended stay hotel on the other side of town. After unloading the car, I drove to the airport, put the Volvo in the long-term parking lot, and rented a Hertz car. My plan was to make sure the snakes didn't find or chase me. The rental car took me to my new base of operations. An Uber driver drove me to pick up Sam's car so I could put it in storage. When I moved, I would unload the car and sell it. After all, it was titled in my name since Sam failed to get it insured after speeding tickets. A dinner of pizza and beer delivered to my room allowed me to stay out of anyone's sight. I didn't want to leave the house as I had projects that needed to be completed. Projects that involved moving personal funds around so that no one but me could manage them. The joint credit cards were paid off and closed. I left her the amount of her last 2 paychecks in a joint account and took the rest for myself. Sam would have to study harder since I had squandered the entire college fund I had set aside for him by withdrawing money each month. He will have to ask his real father for that money. Huh. That night, I had to work my head a little bit to fall asleep. I kept remembering all the good things about my family and wanted to give it back. Common sense told me that the people I loved didn't care about me, so why should I care about them? After this reboot, I became not so much Clumsy Joe, but Scary Joe. Tomorrow, Scary Joe will be going to Tyndall's manufactory. It will be Sunday, and no one will be in the office. Oh, what a fun day I could have. The funny thing is, I slept better because of it. My rental car and I parked a reasonable distance from the entrance to Tyndall's manufactory. I could have parked in my spot, but then someone would have thought I was there. After disabling the security alarm and then rearming it, I went to my office. Since I was the CFO, I had access to all the money accounts. Tyndall had 7 different accounts, so I transferred all the money into one main one. The money left over would be enough for 2 employee paychecks. The line of credit at the bank was exhausted and added to the general account. I transferred all the funds to our international account in the Caymans. It was still company money. I wasn't going to be charged with any crime other than cuckoldry. This Cayman account had been set up years ago because we used it as a clearinghouse, buying and selling goods to European companies. Now the fun part began. I changed the username and password for each account. For a while, no one will be able to access the accounts. They wouldn't even know where to start since none of the banks sent monthly statements on paper or by email. Chuckling, I changed the mailing address to 101 Big Tree Street, 2. Montana, 59085. I sent emails about closing electric, gas, water, phone, and internet bills. Since the beginning of time, Tyndall residents have always saved every scrap of paper related to business. 5 years ago, I started a program where everything was stored in the cloud. The only paper we had was vehicle paperwork and warranties. Everyone in the finance department had access to these files. I was the only one authorized to add and delete files. Passwords and logins were changed so no one could even look at the accounts. All the CNC machines networked together were given new passwords and logins. I chose Eric's office as my next location to try to extract anything of interest from his computer. It didn't take me long to find a few video files. He was entertaining the staff, the wives of the locals, and of course, Carol. I burned the videos to a flash drive and left his computer undamaged. I wanted to save that retribution for later. The last stop was the back room, not a regular room, but a fortress. This secure room with concrete walls housed the main power line. Tyndall MFG consumed a huge amount of electricity and all the machines were humming. Touching the wrong wire at the wrong moment could turn a person to ashes in a nanosecond. The electrician and I were the only ones allowed to enter the house. The bureaucracy of the electric company would take days to disconnect us from the power. In the meantime, I disconnected everything from the safe room and then installed new locks. By the time they realized it was the breakers in the main transformer box that tripped, the electric company will have already turned off the lights. You'll have to work hard to open that heavy door. The keys to this room, and all the other keys to rooms, closets, warehouses, trucks, offices, and cars, were thrown into a bucket of cleaning fluid that would wash away all traces of where the key had been. It was sad to leave the building I grew up in and wanted it to be my one and only place to work. Becoming president with Sam standing behind me and running the company was one of my dreams. That dream turned into a nightmare, like most of my other dreams. During my time at Tyndall, I attended most of the industry conventions. I went to meetings and breakout sessions, and Eric took his buddies to parties and strip clubs. This has now become my new job search destination. There was no need to open any of the voluminous messages, phone calls, or emails my formerly wonderful family sent. The words were simply repetitive. We love you. We're sorry you're upset, but we did what we did for you, not against you, not to hurt your feelings. Please sit down with us or with your wife so we can explain things better. My mother begged Edward to forgive her for getting me pregnant, and they stayed married. Why couldn't I do the same with Carol and Sam? The number 17 flashed through my brain. Because Carol had fun with him for 17 years, and your son's mother was just a one-night stand whore. Tuesday morning, I called my attorney Bob Carson to represent me and discuss my options. He had a 3 p.m. free time, so I went back to my apartment and gathered the documents I thought he would need. I would have preferred to file for divorce on grounds of adultery, but that would have required me to move the bitch to another state. I doubted she would agree to that. I told him the consequences of her infidelity and told him I didn't want to pay alimony. I agreed to a 50-50th split. I do not own any shares in Tyndall MFG. All I had was a salary and some income from patents. It was to my advantage for Tyndall MFG to impose a substandard salary on me, a salary that I thought would one day lead me to the presidency and stock ownership. Carol's salary as a school principal was very close to mine, so the attorney decided that the case should be open and easily dismissed if she didn't fight back. The plan was to get the papers ready as soon as possible and file them in court, preferably at her school. After all, she had humiliated me for years. It was time to share the shame. While at the attorney's office, I informed him of the reallocation of the Tyndall funds. Since I was the CFO, the company allowed me to transfer money from one bank to another. I didn't take a dime from the accounts. The money still belonged to Tyndall MFG. They would just have to work hard to get it. He thought my actions were unwise. Joe, if Tyndall suffers any monetary loss as a result of this reshuffle, as you call it, they can sue you. They can sue you and probably win it. And what will they get? What kind of property do I have that they have to spend a huge amount of money on revenge? Besides, they won't like it if I have to explain in court under oath to the good people of our town why I acted as I did. No, sir, they don't want this Pandora's box open to the public. He shook his head and informed me that he needed a check for $3,000. From my list of manufacturers I had met with and wanted to work for, it didn't take long before I had 3 meetings. These companies wanted both my services and access to my patents. There was absolutely no reason to stay in town. I had many friends whose help I could count on, but I didn't want to burden them. There was only one way to get out of this vat of crap: work my way up and show up in a new place. To start over at age 43. A week later, Bob Carson called to say he'd just gotten back from the DA's office. Edward was yelling and demanding that I be arrested for embezzlement, fraud, and grand larceny. Bob told the DA and Edward that all the funds were in a Tyndall account that had been active for years. All the money still belongs to the company. Nothing has been withdrawn from it. Edward just has to register a new person for that account. Of course, I knew the old asshole would have to fly to the Cayman Islands to do that. And he absolutely hates flying, especially over water. A month after Carol got the divorce papers, my lawyer called and asked if I had returned her phone calls. I laughed at such a silly question. Of course, I had not returned any calls, texts, emails, mailings, or smoke signals. 2 legal issues stood in the way of finalizing the divorce. Carol objected to my taking the college fund and Sam's car. Even my attorney thought it would be difficult to get it through a judge. I replied that I would let them take half of those funds. If that wasn't enough, I would sue for fraud because I was led to believe I was his father and had paid all his expenses for the past 16 years. I would sue Carol, Eric, Sally, and Edward. I might not win the case, but the media would have a great time watching Tyndall's dirty laundry come out on social media. A week later, the lawyer called and said Carol was willing to sign the papers as presented if I would spend 1 hour with her. Presumably, she wanted to justify herself or just explain the horrible things she had done to me. Either way, I didn't want to see or talk to her again. However, the new clean slate I was creating required that any legal ties to her and anyone named Tyndall be terminated. On the condition that only Carol and I attend the meeting, I agreed. I also wanted to have a videotape of the entire meeting to make sure I wasn't trapped. It sounds silly, But after what I'd put up with without complaint for the past 17 years, I didn't want to take any chances. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon the following week, I drove my rental car up to my former driveway. Seeing no other suspicious cars that might contain people I didn't want to see, I approached the front door. She must have been watching me because the door opened like magic. Between us lay 2 stacks of papers that were supposed to legally destroy our marriage. Romantically speaking, the marriage was already broken. As with shit, the papers were the last thing to go. She offered me a drink, but I abruptly declined. I purposely didn't ask how she was doing because I didn't care anymore, and why would I? Instead, I said, "Okay, I'm at your place. You can start." For the next 15 minutes, I listened to her read the Vagabond Bible, chapter by chapter and verse by verse. Nothing new. I tried to count the number of "I'm sorry" and "Can we work this out?" But her rhetoric bored me. She even opened a history book and quoted how Edward forgave my mother. In large Sharpie letters, I wrote on her envelope, "Once is less than 17 years at 24 times a year, which equals 408 times." That wasn't that many times, Joe. Okay, show me the math on how many times. In a small and trembling voice, she whispered, "Too many." There was no anger or rage on my face, just a lack of emotion. Seeing my lack of interest, she thought of something for me. "Do you want to ask me any questions?" Looking her straight in the eye, I asked why. Taking a deep breath, she began, "Your father, oh, I'm so sorry. Edward really wanted the Tyndall lineage to continue. Even when I was trying to get Sam pregnant, I still made love to you, hoping that you would be the one to get me pregnant. I really wanted to have a baby with you and be a family forever, but I blew it." The thought of calling her a whore, which Edward didn't like, was tempting. Let her simmer in her own juices for now. "I don't agree with your disgusting conclusion, Carol. I've heard it enough times to be repulsed by the suggestion that Eric's child would create a bond in our family. So was continuing to have fun with Eric after the pregnancy really your idea of keeping our family together? Was it really that much fun for you to continue to secretly humiliate me?" "No, Joe. It had nothing to do with you. Bullshit," I shouted. "It had everything to do with me. I was your husband. You promised not to have fun with anyone else. What's wrong with you if you think cheating with someone else is okay? Is it okay that I don't know about it?" "I'm sorry, Joe. I didn't put it that way. I meant to say that it's more about me than you. When I decided to get pregnant with Eric, I found out that he was never as good a lover as you. As soon as I got pregnant, I stopped seeing him. Now all my fun was centered on the man I loved because he loved me. So you went back to him later because I was too good a lover. Ridiculous. That might sound awful. Yeah, the whole damn thing with Eric sounds awful. Hurry up and tell that sad, sad story about how you had to have fun with a big bad man who didn't suit you. Please, Joe, I only have an hour of what's left of our life together to tell that story. I still love you, but I know I ruined my chance with you. I just want to convince you that what I did had absolutely nothing to do with our relationship with you. You've been wonderful to me, the best husband a woman could ever have. But I have a flaw. I'm very successful in life, and sometimes it goes to my head. I start to think I'm better, smarter, and more intelligent than my peers. I lose compassion for others and act like an arrogant bitch. And you know I do. I needed a man who would be strict with me, and Eric was just the right man for that. Joe, that flaw manifested itself after your mother and father convinced me to get pregnant by Eric instead of you. You mean when you were bred as a farm animal? I interjected. I suppose it was something like that since there was no demonstration of affection. We just got on with it and I left. To summarize, Joe, I went back to having fun with Eric because it humiliates me, and I needed to get down off my high horse and not be so smug. I used him instead of a therapist to change my superiority complex. Now looking back, I made a big mistake and regret hurting the best man I met in my life. Someday, when all of this is behind us, I hope you'll remember those moments when we were happy together. That's a pretty far-fetched story. At least I know most of the facts, or do I? She replied quietly, "Yes, you know all the facts now." Stumbling, I headed for the door, leaving a trail of small pieces of meat and pasta behind me. Carol's sobs made my ears pop. Apparently, she didn't like the vomit on the carpet and dress. That's too bad. My lawyer had to retype the papers because no one in court would touch them. 2 weeks later, the divorce was signed, and I kept half of the college fund and the car money. She gets the house until bastard Sam graduates. I'm sure he was pissed. But since he didn't want me in his life anymore, me and all my money was gone too. Since I wasn't the father of that ungrateful bastard, I refused to pay child support. If the court had required it, I would have changed my confession to adultery and sued all the Tindalls for fraud. No one needed the embarrassment. I was already ashamed of being a Tyndall. While I was self-deprecating, I agonized with doubts about watching the video files I had downloaded from Eric's office. I still hadn't come to terms with the fact that I had found out about Carol's infidelity, not to mention being collected enough to watch two people I hated having fun. Each file had a name, and I got goosebumps when I saw Syndra's name on a relatively small file. Syndra was the name of the wife of one of my best friends, John Brown. John was 2 years older than me, but we hardly ever socialized since he was a big athlete and I was a nerd. But this nerd was chosen to help an athlete take a required English course. He excelled in science and math, but found himself stumped in English class. Over the course of the semester, we became friends until he left to attend a small college on a soccer scholarship. After college, he returned to our town to be near his aging parents. He approached me about employment, and I was pleased that he was focusing on math and engineering, which would be a good fit for a job at our store. On my recommendation, he was hired and we renewed our friendship. A couple years ago, a turning point came in John and Syndra's relationship. As I understand it, Syndra was at a bachelorette party and apparently had too much to drink. Anyway, she had a little fun with some guy, got embarrassed and told John about it as soon as she got home. But by then, the damage was done. They had 2 little boys by then, and a divorce would have been a disaster. Syndra's file was the smallest and began with her crashing in a hotel room. Syndra had made an impression on me. Now I understood why John didn't want to get rid of her. Eric, meanwhile, was having fun with Syndra. Neither of them said a word during this show. John always wanted to know what happened, but now I had proof in case he wanted revenge. I invited John over to my house to discuss something very personal. After a couple beers, he asked about my top-secret conversation. Without knowing it myself, John, I came across a video of your wife doing it with another guy. I think she was drunk. I can either tell you who it was or show you the video or both. Which option will hurt you the least? It took the large man some time to calm down. There were tears in his eyes and his breathing was deep. I put my hand on his shoulder but said nothing. Who? Was all he said. Brother Eric. But she really doesn't like him. Thinks he's a real asshole. Why would she have fun with Eric? Like I said, John, she seemed out of it. I'll show you the video to prove she wasn't the instigator of this date. Watching the video, he recognized the nameless guy who had entertained her after a bachelorette party a few years ago. She didn't know his name or even the reason they were doing it. Telling John the story, she sobbed uncontrollably. Trying to speak calmly, he asked, "Why would he want to entertain his employee's wife like that?" She said it was a one-time thing and he never contacted her again. My guess, John, is that he didn't know her last name. He didn't need her first name, just one. Standing up, he said, "Thanks, Joe. Surprisingly, that's very helpful. I'm glad I forgave her then because she was so upset and sorry. Now I know the facts, but I don't know whether to share them with Syndra or not. I'll have to play it by ear. Can I have that video, Joe?" "Of course you can. I think it's the only copy I have." "You won't be upset if your brother suddenly has a few accidents in the next few months?" "Be nice. That would work in my favor since I've already kicked his ass once, so I'd be under suspicion. Make sure I know the time so I have an alibi." "Thanks, Joe. You're like a brother to me." "Yeah, and you're a much better brother than I was assigned." We hugged and he said over his shoulder, "Stay in touch." I didn't rewatch the video of Carol and Eric for long. It wasn't worth it. It just ruined my mood. The time came and I just destroyed all the videos with Carol's name on them. I didn't want to see those 2 sluts again. As I was deleting the files, fate intervened and made me press play instead of delete. It was more disgusting than I could have imagined. 2 weeks later, John stopped by my place for a beer to thank me for answering the horrible questions that had plagued him for years, and also to thank me for proving to him that Syndra wasn't having an affair. He had the idea of using the remaining tapes to destroy the cheating wives and help the husbands who had been ruined by Eric's careless actions. I gladly gave him the remaining disgusting videotapes. My connections with my new employer worked well. One of Tyndall's main competitors contacted me and asked me to drive 100 miles to their town for an interview. This was the first glimmer of happiness for me in a while. Of course, I was willing to meet with them anytime, any day. Donen Corporation was led by CEO and President Tim Donen. My meeting with Tim, don't call me Mr. Donen, went very well and I was offered a very good package of services, the same as my colleagues. There was one caveat, though. I had to meet with the Reynolds resource manager for a personality assessment. Given what I had been through over the past few months, I was worried that they might find something amiss in my mind. The person I was to meet with the next morning at 10 o'clock was Mickey D. Reynolds, the owner of the company. Reynolds Resources did more than just personality assessments. They also handled all the human resources, recruiting, corporate governance, and reporting for Donen MFG. Tim said it made his job very easy because he was the consummate engineer who loved projects more than paperwork. Their office was very modern and sophisticated, not at all like Donen's usual production office. After giving the attractive receptionist my name, I offered her coffee and a couch to sit on until Mickey D could see me. To my surprise, Mickey D actually turned out to be Mickey D, a very attractive woman, probably in her 30s. She wasn't surprised that I stuttered as we shook hands. The firm but feminine grip seemed very pleasant to me. We spent the next couple hours discussing my personality traits, preferences, and engineering philosophy. Our conversations were polite and very pleasant. Delicately, she explained the reasons why I was leaving my inherited job at Tyndall. She knew she was not allowed to ask any personal questions, but left the door open for me to let her know anything I wanted to know. All I told her was that I was being considered as a presidential candidate and was underpaid for the duties I was performing. My God, Joe, it's 11:45, and you probably want to go to lunch. I'll send my report to Tim, and he'll get back to you with the details. Wouldn't it be a violation of company policy if I offered to take you to lunch? You know, sort of like a new employee's tour of the Chamber of Commerce. She smiled slyly and replied, I'd love to. We headed out for the first of many lunches that evolved into dinners and more over the next few months. I was in no hurry to get into a relationship, but was eager to spend time with her as I really enjoyed being around her. Judging by her reaction, she seemed happy with the pace and progression of the friendship. At this time, Tyndall Manufacturing was experiencing financial difficulties. Even though Tyndall had the money to pay all the bills, there just wasn't enough. Edward had to act fast because suppliers and vendors needed to be paid. To keep the company afloat, he had to utilize the capital available. The 160 acres of building land outside of town was worth millions. Yet the thought of mortgaging the property made all the cold bones of the Tyndalls, who had owned it for more than a century, shudder. The mortgage helped the company hold out until Edward went to the Caymans to get control of the money. The reputational damage, however, was great. Instead of allowing title to pay for materials after 14 days, suppliers demanded cash up front. This severely damaged their working capital, and the mortgage was not repaid as the Cayman money returned to the States. Gradually, the details of the explosion in my personal and business world became known to Mickey D. She was sympathetic as her world had been affected by the explosion caused by the UPS truck that had hit and killed her husband 2 years earlier. He was the founder and brains behind Reynolds Resources. She worked with him and kept the business going when he was gone. Meanwhile, John learned that someone had attacked Eric in the parking lot of a dark bar. Working at Donen's brought great happiness into my life. I got settled in, and since I didn't have a non-compete clause at Tyndall's, I started beating off their best customers. They knew I had left the company and were happy to have my contact information. I wasn't a salesman like Eric, but I knew what they needed and how to produce it better, faster, and cheaper than Tyndall. All Eric knew about our products was that you had to pay someone for them. Eric didn't interact with customers very often. He seemed to be constantly traumatized in one way or another, usually after leaving the bar. 6 months later, and after the divorce was finalized, his relationship with Mickey D became wonderful. In addition to being beautiful, loving, intelligent, and caring, she was fun to be with. After many dates and getting closer, our evenings became more physical. Not rough, but lots of touching, stroking, and kissing. One night I thought Mickey was acting like she enjoyed being in bed with me. She raised her beautiful eyes to me once and asked, "Shall we leave?" "Sure." We got home and got down to business. Soon, we decided it was time to rent an apartment. Since Christmas was approaching, we decided to wait until the new year. But first, she wanted me to meet her parents. She told them she was dating a great guy, at least that's what she said, and they wanted him to come to their house. This might be the beginning of me having a real family again. I was a little nervous as we pulled up to a large but unassuming house. As soon as the door opened, Mickey D stepped toward me and grabbed the arm of a man in gray slacks and a red Christmas sweater. She made a quarter turn to the right and said, "Daddy, I want you to meet the man I love, Joe Tyndall. Joe, meet my father." This is where I interrupted her by saying, "Mr. Donan, oh Tim, I didn't know she was your daughter. I don't even know what to say." "Say, it's good to see you, Tim. And come on in the house?" "Why didn't you tell me Tim was your father? Don't you think that would have been interesting to me?" "Yes, Joe, and that's exactly why we didn't want you to know about it. I wanted to know if you were interested in me or my inheritance. And we also didn't want the employees to say you were in a relationship with the boss's daughter and the company's sole heiress. Like me, she had a younger brother, but he died when he was only 16. So what does it mean to me to be invited to Christmas dinner with my mother and father? Is it personal, business, and does it affect our relationship?" "Joe, it means I love you and want you to meet my family. Business is separate. Since you told me you don't have a family, I'm asking you to spend Christmas with my family." "Okay, now I know about Mickey D. D is Donan. I really don't understand anything. Do you?" She giggled and said, "Maybe you should add a D to your name to make it duh." At that point, all four of us laughed. After the air cleared, we all had a wonderful afternoon and evening. I really enjoyed chatting with Tim and Mickey's mom, Barbara. I may be out of the loop, but I was under the impression that my request for Mickey's hand in marriage would be accepted by her parents. I'm pretty sure Mickey will say yes, but given what happened to me, I don't like to take things on faith. My instincts proved correct. Mickey jumped up from the couch and rushed over to me as I got down on one knee with the blue velvet box in my hands. She screamed, "Yes, yes, 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 yes." 3 months later, we had a small wedding with no one from my half of the church except John and Sindra, and a few new friends I made. After a honeymoon in the Caribbean, we returned to my apartment and began our life together. The first thing Mickey had to do was get off the birth control pill. We decided that it would be a while before my boys would meet her egg, so let it be okay. We went to the county courthouse to get a name change. Mickey D. Reynolds reverted back to her maiden name of Mickey Donan. Given society's more lenient attitude toward gender identity, marital status, and personal names, I changed my name to Joseph Timothy Donan. When we asked his permission, Tim was honored and delighted that I had taken the last name Donan. With tears in his eyes, he whispered, "Thank you, son." My friend John found a file of Carol having fun with Eric, and he had the urge to get back at both him and me for being cuckolds. A week later, Carol was walking down the hallway between classes when she heard someone's harsh barking. It struck her as odd. Turning around at the sound, she saw a small group of upperclassmen grinning after her. When she turned around, she was startled by a bark, bark, bark coming from another group of boys. Remembering that the school's mascot was a bulldog, she decided that Friday night was a good time to start preparing for the game. As soon as she entered the office, the barking stopped. She heard no more barking for the next 2 hours, but as soon as she left the office, the barking resumed. The barking traveled from one end of the hallway to the other, as if she had just entered a dog box at feeding time. There was the occasional howl, but mostly it was bark, bark, bark from everywhere. None of the other staff members experienced a similar phenomenon. The next morning, as soon as she stepped into the concrete parking lot, the sound was like the starting line of an Iditarod dog sled race in Alaska. All mouths were pointed at her as if she had turned the surround sound from 50 speakers on full blast. She hurried into the building, looking ahead at the concrete, not at the impersonators. She breathed a sigh of relief as the door slammed shut behind her. As she walked toward her office, a male voice called out to her, "Bark like a dog, bitch! Bark like a dog!" The deep voice belonged to Eric. But what was he doing here? Why had he uttered that phrase? It was like a ton of bricks came crashing down on her head, and she realized what had happened. From the question, "How did the video get on the net?" she jumped to, "Oh shit, what am I going to do now with my job, with my career, with my dignity?" It's all going to be ripped to shreds. She quickly ran into her office and slammed the door shut. Were her staff smirking? Did they know what had happened? Who saw the video? What am I supposed to do now? In the middle of the first school hour, as the hallways emptied, she ran out of her office. Over her shoulder, she yelled that she wasn't feeling well and was going home. She hadn't lied to them. She really did feel bad. But she didn't go home. Instead, she roared down the street toward Tyndall's factory. Bursting into Eric's office, she screamed, "Did you give out the video of us having fun? If you did, I'm going to kill you." Eric saw and felt her blazing with rage. He quickly stammered, "No, I have them all here. I'm the only one who has them." He patted the computer and brought up a file on the screen. "You stupid asshole, you've been hacked. They infiltrated the network and I'm destroyed. Can this life get any worse?" Sobbing and moaning, she collapsed to the floor. Not knowing what to do, Eric ran to his father's office and the two of them returned to the howling Carol. The two great minds decided to carry her into the house, shut the door, and get back to work. Epilogue, 5 years later. Carol had to give up her job as principal because she had lost the respect of the staff, students, and school board. She was given the job because she was an expert in her field. Her new role was to work in an unfinished basement office where she researched all the new state and national procedures and guidelines. She had little interaction with other staff members and no interaction with students. With greasy, unwashed hair, dressed in flannel pajamas and fuzzy slippers, she would come into the building at 6 a.m. Then she would leave an hour before classes ended. Because of her notoriety, she was forced to live like a social leper, traveling out of town to buy groceries. Sam was sent home quite often for fighting. It's hard to resist fighting when his classmates call his mother Wonder Dog Lassie. At first, a few men showed interest in her and sent her dog cookies with a phone number, attached in hopes of getting a response. After I left, Title MFG's financial situation began to resemble falling down the toilet. The loss of customers to Donan MFG, increased costs for the CFO and COO, and poor management on Eric's part doomed the company's economic viability. To pay off the mortgage and other debts, Edward had to sell the 160-acre farm he had inherited. The land was to be used to build mid-priced housing, taking advantage of the scenic hilly terrain. A business broker found a buyer for the company, and Edward pulled the trigger, destroying the family business. Edward and Sally rented a small apartment that took up a significant portion of their Social Security. After Edward and Sally's death, the only evidence of the Tyndall family's existence in town would be the tombstones. Eric and Sam left town, starting a new career as a used car salesman and burgerman. On July 1st, the company director called a meeting of all employees to introduce the new president. Edward and Eric were invited not to attend. The new foreman, John Brown, caught the attention of the curious crowd and exclaimed, "Ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce you to our new president, Mr. Joe Donan." The employees were happy to hear that they had been sold to a competitor and not to a huge conglomerate that would sell off equipment and lay everyone off. The real surprise came when I walked out of the office. Most people recognized me, but not by that name. "Hello, everyone. I'm glad to be back in this building. Did you miss me?" This was met with a huge roar. Apparently, Eric wasn't turning out to be as good a president as he thought he was. After he assured the assembled Donan MFG employees that the former Tyndall MFG factory would be used and developed. Of course, the building and your paychecks will have Donan MFG written on them. Applause again. And thank you for the wonderful reception. I'm sure it will be a great change for all of us. And now let me introduce my family. My wife, Mickey D., and our son, Timothy Joseph Donan. Yes, DNA confirmed he is my son. The end. Thanks for watching. Hope you enjoyed it. Subscribe to my channel and stay tuned for the next videos.